And at precisely 6:02 a.m., in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Phoenix, Arizona, a scream of slamming doors shattered the calm morning air. Mason Carter, a heavy-set 45-year-old white man with a temper as short as his fuse, shot up from bed, scowling. The noise was coming from next door, and Mason didn't like noise, especially not that kind of noise. He stomped to the window, yanked the curtain, and narrowed his eyes. That house had new tenants. Some guy who'd just moved in yesterday, a tall, broad-shouldered black man, probably in his 40s, unloading boxes on the porch. 2 police officers had just stepped out of the home, talking calmly before getting into their cruiser. Mason's stomach tightened. Figures, he muttered, suspicion already blooming in his gut. Without hesitation, Mason stormed out onto his porch and shouted, "Hey, keep it down, you damn thug. Don't make me call the cops again." The man paused mid-lift, looking at Mason with a calm, unreadable expression, but he said nothing, just quietly adjusted his boxes and turned back toward his house. Mason smirked. Silence meant submission in his book, but just as he was heading back inside, his foot struck a large box sitting near the edge of his lawn. Without thinking, he kicked it across the driveway. "Get your trash off my land," he barked. That was when the stranger finally spoke. His voice was deep, controlled. "That's mine. You're damaging my property." But Mason only laughed cruelly. "You should thank me for not setting it on fire." What Mason didn't know, what no one in that neighborhood knew, was that the man next door wasn't just a quiet new tenant. He wasn't there to make friends, and he wasn't there to cause trouble either. He was there to end it, because buried beneath Mason's charming white picket fence life was a secret darker than the desert night, a secret so dangerous, so criminal it could shatter the entire block. And the man he'd just insulted, he wasn't backing down. He was watching, waiting, and when the moment was right, he'd strike, not out of revenge, but in the name of justice. And when the truth exploded, it wouldn't be Mason's gun or his arrogance that saved him. It would be far too late. Mason slammed the door behind him, chest heaving with pride. He believed he'd just put that man in his place. As he plopped into his worn-out recliner with a steaming mug of black coffee, a sick satisfaction settled in his gut. That smug, quiet neighbor. Who the hell did he think he was, showing up with police and boxes like he owned the block? But Mason didn't realize something crucial. Across the street, behind tinted car windows, 2 figures were watching everything. A man and a woman in plain clothes, surveillance equipment in hand, taking notes. One whispered into a mic, "Subject Carter engaged. Target response, hostile, proceed with caution." Back in his house, Mason grunted as he shuffled toward the kitchen. That's when he noticed it. The blinds in a neighbor's window were slightly parted, and behind them the same man stood there, not moving, just watching. Mason's jaw tightened. "He's spying now?" he hissed, slamming his cup down hard enough to splash coffee onto the countertop. "Not on my watch." He stormed outside without thinking, barefoot on concrete, the desert morning sun already heating the ground. He marched straight to the neighbor's porch, fists clenched. The door opened before Mason could knock. The man stood there, composed and unflinching. "Good morning," he said, voice deep and even. Mason nearly spat. "Cut the act. I don't need your good mornings. I need you to stop lurking, you understand? This is a peaceful street, and I don't want trouble." "Then stop making it," the man replied, gaze steady. Mason's face turned red. "You don't get to talk to me like that." "Actually," the man said calmly, "I do." Yeah, it grew thick. Before Mason could respond, a car pulled up. Not a police cruiser this time, but a minivan. Out stepped a woman with 2 children. They ran past the men, calling out, "Uncle Eli," with pure joy in their voices. Mason stared, dumbstruck. "You've got family?" he muttered. Illy, the man next door, simply nodded and ushered the kids inside, pausing just long enough to say, "I suggest you stop assuming you know who people are." That night, Mason couldn't sleep. His paranoia turned into obsession. He re-watched old footage from his home security cameras, analyzing Ely's every move. One video showed Ely standing near the fence, looking at Mason's yard. Another showed him walking past the mailbox. Too slowly, Mason thought. "He's casing the place," Mason muttered. "He's planning something." The Mason started digging. He searched public records, nothing. He checked social media, no presence. It even went as far as calling an old friend in local law enforcement, run the name Elijah Brooks, new guy on my street, real suspicious. But the report that came back surprised him. decorated military record, former federal agent, no criminal history, multiple community service awards. Mason couldn't believe it. He's hiding something, he insisted. No one's that clean. But the next day, Mason followed him. Eli drove to a local shelter, dropped off groceries, then to a youth center, donated books. Mason watched from a distance, grinding his teeth. What game is he playing? Later that night, Mason made a decision. If Eli wouldn't leave, he'd force him to. Under the cover of darkness, he snuck over to Eli's yard. He scattered garbage across the porch, scratched the car with a key, even spray-painted a racial slur on the fence. But before Mason could escape back to his house, motion-activated lights flooded the yard. Annie was there, standing on the porch, silent, not moving. Mason froze. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eli said softly, "I thought maybe you'd grow tired of this. I thought maybe you were just afraid. But this is hate." Mason sneered. "What are you going to do about it?" Eli stepped down from the porch, stopping only inches away. "You don't scare me. I've dealt with warlords, terrorists, drug cartels, and you're just a coward with too much time and too little soul." The words cut deeper than Mason expected. But he kept his bravado. "Keep talking. Maybe next time I'll bring a real message." "I hope you do," Eli replied, "because every time you come closer, you're just helping me finish what I came here to do." Before Mason could ask what that meant, police sirens wailed in the distance, not stopping at a neighbor's, not passing by. They were coming for him. A search warrant, a full sweep. And for the first time, Mason's arrogance cracked. He ran, but there was nowhere left to hide. Eli watched from the curb, arms crossed, as officers stormed the house. No longer just a neighbor. No longer silent, but the beginning of Mason Carter's end. As Mason Carter was dragged out in handcuffs, struggling and cursing, the quiet neighborhood he'd once ruled with intimidation stood frozen in disbelief. Porch lights flicked on, curtains rustled. For the first time, the neighbors truly looked and saw the truth. Mason wasn't a protector. He was a predator. And the man he'd mocked, cursed, and nearly killed, he wasn't a threat. He was the reason they were finally safe. Elijah Brooks watched from the sidewalk, his face calm but unreadable. His dark eyes followed Mason as he disappeared into the back of a patrol car, still screaming about conspiracies and betrayal. But Elijah wasn't satisfied, not yet. Inside Mason's home, the police discovered more than just the drug lab. They found hard drives filled with footage, neighbors recorded without consent, cameras hidden behind walls in mailboxes, even disguised as lawn ornaments. There were detailed notes about every house on the street, and one file stood out, marked in all caps, Target, LEJ. The report was chilling. "You had blueprints of your house," the lead detective told Elijah later that night. "Escape routes, floor plans, pictures of your family from public events. He was planning something serious." Elijah nodded, jaw tight. "I had a feeling it was more than hate. It was obsession." But Elijah didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat on his front porch, watching the stars disappear behind thick desert clouds, heart heavy. He hadn't come here to be a hero. He'd come to finish an operation. Operation Smoke Veil had started 6 months earlier, when Elijah Zanechia, then still a senior agent with the DEA, uncovered a tip that a major drug distributor was hiding in plain sight in a quiet Arizona suburb. When they traced the shipments back to a man named Mason Carter, Elijah volunteered to go undercover. His boss had warned him, "This won't be like overseas. These kinds of enemies wear polo shirts and wave flags. They smile while they stab." He was right. In the following weeks, Elijah endured, more than most agents do in active combat, verbal abuse, racial slurs, threats to his life, and yet he stayed silent, patient, focused, because while Mason thought he was hunting Elijah, it was Elijah who was laying the trap. But it wasn't over, not yet. The next morning, Elijah received an anonymous envelope, no return address. Inside were 2 photos, one of his sister walking to her car, the other of his nephew at school. On the back of the second photo were 4 words scribbled in black ink, "You're not done yet." Elijah's stomach dropped. Mason had a network, and someone out there still wanted him dead. He drove straight to headquarters. The director, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, stood as Elijah entered. "We found it," he said. "The supplier. It's bigger than we thought." They laid it out. Mason wasn't the kingpin. He was just a distributor. The real boss was still out there, someone with reach into city politics, police corruption, and even a judge on the payroll. And Elijah, he was the one man who'd gotten too close. "We want you to pull out," the director said. "You've done enough." But Elijah's eyes narrowed. "Not until this is finished." That night, Elijah returned home to find his front door cracked open. He stepped inside slowly, hand hovering near his concealed firearm. The air smelled wrong, like bleach and something metallic. Then he saw it. His living room was destroyed, paper shredded, furniture overturned, and carved into the wall above the fireplace was a single word: run. Elijah stood still, breathing, listening. A creak upstairs. He moved like a shadow. Up the stairs, down the hall. At the end, the door to his guest room stood ajar. He kicked it open. Empty. But on the bed lay a burner phone, still warm in his hand. It rang. Elijah answered, silent. A voice on the other end, calm, male, with a slight drawl, said, "You should have taken the win, Agent. Now it's going to get personal." Elijah gripped the phone, fingers trembling. He wasn't afraid. He was furious. This wasn't just about Mason anymore. This was about something deeper, something systemic. And if they thought threatening his family would stop him, they'd miscalculated. He placed the phone down, opened his safe, and pulled out the files. Names, photos, dates. Every clue he had gathered over the last 6 months. Then he reached for the worn military badge tucked behind a photo of his father, a Vietnam vet who taught him that silence wasn't weakness and dignity wasn't defeat. He whispered to the empty house, "You wanted war? You just got it." As he closed the safe and locked the door, headlights flashed outside. Backup had arrived, and the real hunt was about to begin. Rain fell over the Arizona desert that night, rare, sudden, and sharp. It soaked the street in a glossy sheen as Elijah Brooks stood beneath his porch light, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the quiet road ahead. The 3 unmarked SUVs pulled in and stopped. The doors opened simultaneously. Out stepped agents from the FBI, DEA, and U.S. Marshals. This wasn't just a neighborhood matter anymore. This was federal. Elijah opened the door before they knocked. Inside, every wall was covered in maps, photographs, red strings, and timelines. Mason's operation, as it turned out, had spanned 4 states. But the real shock came from what Elijah uncovered next. "You see this symbol?" Elijah said, pointing to a logo burned into a wooden crate found in Mason's basement. "It's not just a brand. It's a mark of the Sable Cartel." And the room went still. The Sable Cartel was legend, a ghost syndicate known for its brutal efficiency and untraceable shipments. If Mason was working with them, it meant one thing. The neighborhood was just the surface. Underneath was an empire. A young analyst stepped forward, eyes wide. "We just got access to Carter's financials, multiple shell companies, offshore accounts, and get this, one of them made a donation to a judge's campaign last year." Elijah didn't flinch. "That's our leak. That judge is protecting them. We bring him down, the whole system cracks." The director nodded, grim. "Then we move tonight, quietly." But even as the task force prepared, Elijah's instincts screamed. Something felt wrong. He returned home late, exhausted, soaked from the rain. As he hung his coat, he heard a faint click, like metal on metal. His eyes darted to the corner of the living room. A red blinking light. Laser tripwire. He dived just as the explosion ripped through the side of the house. The shockwave hurled him across the room. Windows shattered. Smoke poured in. Lucky but conscious, Elijah crawled through the debris, adrenaline pumping. His ears rang. The house was on fire, and outside, footsteps. Heavy, measured. Through the smoke, a masked figure appeared. Tall, muscular, carrying a pistol with a silencer. Elijah scrambled for cover. He recognized the build, the movement. This wasn't just a hired gun. This was personal. They fought in the flames, brutal, close, and desperate. The intruder struck with precision, clearly trained. Elijah barely deflected a blade slash aimed at his neck. He countered with a hard elbow to the ribs and rolled them both through the broken window. They hit the wet ground with a thud. Lightning flashed. In that moment, Elijah ripped the mask off. He froze. It was Kyle Benton, a former DEA agent, presumed dead 2 years ago during a cartel bust gone sideways. His face was scarred, eyes wild with something unhinged. "You?" Elijah gasped. Kyle sneered. "They didn't kill me, they recruited me." He pressed the gun to Elijah's temple. "And now you know too much." But Elijah had waited for this moment his whole life, the edge between justice and vengeance. He grabbed Kyle's wrist and twisted. The gun dropped. Another flash, another blow, and then Elijah drove a knee into Kyle's chest and pinned him down. Sirens howled in the distance. "You were one of us," Elijah whispered. "You swore the same oath." Kyle coughed blood. Oaths don't feed power. Elijah stood, battered but upright, as the agents swarmed the yard, weapons drawn. Kyle was taken away screaming, not about guilt, but about how this won't stop anything. But Elijah knew otherwise. 3 days later, Elijah stood before a federal court, testifying against the corrupt judge, revealing the hidden files he had spent months collecting. Mason's financial web exposed names that reached into law enforcement, city contracts, and even the governor's brother. And when the judge was arrested on live television, the country erupted. Elijah did celebrate. He visited the ruins of his home instead, staring at the blackened foundation. Insurance would rebuild the house, but not the memories. Inside that house, he had endured hatred, survived assassination attempts, and uncovered a criminal empire, all while pretending to be just the neighbor. He knelt beside the ashes, pulling out a scorched picture frame. Inside was a photo of him and his late father, the one who taught him to fight for what's right, even when no one sees. That night, Elijah wrote a letter to the agency. "I came here to take down a criminal. I uncovered a network that feeds on silence and fear. But I also learned that hatred isn't just loud, it's clever, it hides in routine, in smiles, in picket fences. I'm done being the man in the shadows. It's time to bring light. Put me where the fight is loudest. I'm ready." He signed it. Elijah Brooks, federal agent, survivor, witness, fighter. And he knew this wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning. 1 month later, the dust had settled, or so it seemed. Elijah Brooks sat before a congressional oversight committee in Washington, D.C., recounting every step of the case that began with Mason Carter and exploded into a nationwide investigation. His voice was steady, calm, but the weight of everything he'd seen clung to his shoulders. Behind him, screens flashed with evidence, footage of the drug lab beneath Mason's home, wire transfers to corrupt officials, Carl Benton's confession from prison. The press called it Operation Phoenix, named after the ashes Elijah rose from, literally and metaphorically. But inside Elijah's guts, a knot still twisted. Something didn't add up. The Sable cartel hadn't just vanished overnight. Their leader, known only by the codename Virgil, had never been identified, and Carl's final words still echoed in Elijah's mind. "Do you think this stops anything? You haven't even touched the center." That night, after his testimony, Elijah took a late train home. As the city lights blurred past the window, he reviewed the decrypted messages Kyle had stored on an encrypted thumb drive. One message stood out, a meeting log. July 4th, 11 p.m., the Elm House. Virgil comes in person. Elijah's pulse quickened. The Elm House wasn't a cartel bunker. It was a luxury cabin hidden deep in Sedona's Red Rock Canyons, and Elijah had been there once before. It was where he first trained with a mentor named Peter Langston, a retired intelligence officer turned private security consultant. Langston had taught him everything about fieldcraft, survival, and trust. And that's what made it impossible, because Langston was dead, or so Elijah believed. He didn't alert the agency, not this time. This was personal. If Virgil was real and coming in person, Elijah needed to look him in the eye. 10:47 p.m. on July 4th, Elijah parked a half-mile from the Elm House and hiked in, night vision goggles slipping over his eyes. He moved like a ghost, heart pounding as fireworks from a distant town flashed across the canyon sky. The house glowed with low orange lights. No guards, no vehicles. It was too quiet. Inside, a fireplace crackled. A decanter of brandy sat untouched on the table, and seated in a leather chair, as if expecting a guest, was a man Elijah hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Peter Langston, older now, grey at the temples, but unmistakably alive. "Hello, Elijah," he said, calm as ever. "I was hoping it would be you." Elijah froze, eyes narrowing. "Virgil, it's you?" And Langston gave a sad smile. "It's me, but not in the way you think." The truth unfolded like shattered glass. Langston explained that after retiring he discovered a loophole, a way to infiltrate the drug trade without becoming it. He built fake identities, ran clean labs to study trafficking patterns, and embedded himself inside criminal networks as Virgil, all to expose them. But somewhere along the way the line blurred, and by the time he realized he'd gone too far, the power was intoxicating. "I created a monster to fight one," he said softly. "Then I became it." Elijah's hands trembled. "You trained me to fight people like you." "I trained you to survive," Langston corrected. "You did." There was a long silence. Then Langston slid a folder across the table. "Names, locations, the last of the cartel's backbone. You can finish this, but you'll need to disappear after. They'll never stop hunting you." Elijah didn't touch the folder. "Why now?" Langston looked tired, because for the first time in years I saw fear in my own eyes, and it wasn't you who put it there, it was me. He stood up, stepped to the fireplace, and pulled out a small pistol. "You won't have to arrest me." Elijah rose in alarm, but "I deserve it," Langston whispered. "But don't let this be my legacy. Make it yours." Before Elijah could reach him, the gun fired. Langston collapsed, his last breath a whisper of Elijah's name. By morning, Elijah turned the folder over to federal authorities and vanished without fanfare. The files brought down the remaining cartel cells, judges resigned, mayors were investigated, the web Langston built unraveled. But Elijah? He walked away from everything. 2 years later, a dusty town near the Mexico border, a little bookstore with no name. Inside, a boy around 8 sat cross-legged on the floor, reading a book about soldiers and spies. "Do you think heroes are real?" he asked the man behind the counter. The man, older now, bearded, quiet, looked down with a soft smile. "Sometimes," Elijah said, "they're just the ones who don't give up, even when no one claps for them." Just then, the bell above the door rang. A woman walked in. Not a customer, an agent. She approached quietly and handed Elijah a sealed envelope. Inside was a single line, "We need you, one last time." And he looked out the window at the endless road. Then back at the boy. "I'll be back," he said. And he meant it. 2 months later, the bookstore was closed early. The sign flipped to "back soon." But inside, the light still glowed, soft and warm. Elijah Brooks sat at the small wooden desk behind the counter, a cup of coffee, cooling beside a stack of well-worn books. Since leaving the agency, he had chosen peace, or tried to. Each morning brought a quiet routine: sweep the porch, brew strong coffee, sort through donations. And each night the silence would return. Not loud, but heavy. Until today, a soft knock at the back door made him pause. It wasn't a delivery day. Liza opened it cautiously. There stood a woman in a tailored navy suit, dark glasses, subtle earpiece, official, but her smile was gentle. "Liza Brooks?" "I'm Agent Renee Calhoun, Department of Justice. I've been assigned to a classified case involving witness protection, legacy clearance, and posthumous justice." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "That's a mouthful." She stepped in, handing him a thin manila envelope. "We found something. Something your old mentor left behind. A confession video. Hidden, encrypted, and set to release only in the event of his death. It not only clears your name from any suspicion, but it also identifies 2 remaining cartel members still embedded in U.S. government systems." Elijah opened the folder, eyes scanning the documents inside. It was all there. Peter Langston's voice, recorded weeks before the final encounter. "If you're watching this, it means I finally did the right thing. Elijah Brooks was never my pawn. He was the one man who could save me from myself." Tears welled in Elijah's eyes, but he blinked them away. Agent Calhoun continued. "The DOJ wants to offer you full reinstatement, but with one condition." He looked up. "You lead a new division, not as an agent, as an educator, a builder. We want you to train the next generation, people from every background, every neighborhood, every place that's been overlooked. We need your perspective, your courage." For a long moment, Elijah didn't speak. His life had been survival, one battle after another. Could he finally do something lasting? He smiled sincere. "When do we start?" 1 year later. A new facility opened in Arizona, just a few miles from where Mason's house once stood. Its sign read, "The Elijah Brooks Center for Justice and Leadership." And inside, young men and women trained not with weapons first, but with empathy, with restraint, with truth. Because Elijah hadn't just defeated a criminal empire. He had redefined what justice looked like. And for the first time in a long time, the story didn't end with gunfire, and it ended with hope and a new beginning. In the end, this wasn't just a story about crime or justice. It wasn't even just about Elijah Brooks and the enemies he brought down. It was about something much bigger. This was a story about how courage doesn't always look like a fist or a gun. Sometimes it looks like quiet restraint, like patience in the face of hatred, like showing up every day, holding the line when no one's watching, and choosing dignity over vengeance. Elijah didn't seek recognition. He didn't want revenge. He wanted to stop the cycle of violence, of corruption, of racial judgment, passed in a glance. And he did. He exposed a criminal empire hiding in plain sight. He brought down a network of power built on lies. And most importantly, he proved that you don't have to become the monster to defeat it. But there's something even more powerful here, something we can't ignore. Mason Carter was dangerous, yes, but not just because he dealt drugs. He was dangerous because of something far more common. He judged a man's worth based on the color of his skin. He assumed superiority, he weaponized fear, and he never once paused to consider the possibility that the man he was mocking might be the very person who would hold him accountable. Let that sink in. How many times in real life do we let bias speak louder than truth? How often do we stay silent when someone is degraded, dismissed, or dehumanized simply because they look different? This story is a warning, but also a wake-up call. Because people like Elijah walk among us every day, quiet heroes, workers, veterans, neighbors, teachers, the people we underestimate, but who just might be fighting battles we can't see. So, if you take one message from this story, let it be this. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never judge character by color. And never forget that justice has many faces, and not all of them wear a badge or a robe. Elijah Brooks reminded us what real justice looks like. Not loud, not violent, but unshakable. And when it stands tall, the truth cannot be denied. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes or made you think twice about the power of perception, don't just scroll past. Share it, discuss it, reflect on it. Because the world doesn't change from the top down. It changes from neighbor to neighbor, moment to moment, one choice at a time. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories that reveal the hidden heroes, the hard truths, and the better paths forward, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Okay, we've got more stories to tell, but let's keep the light shining together.